So this is the Lab Manager RA 101 Redirection workshop, and today it's going to be led by Ariel and I. So go ahead.
Sure. So like me, I really like to give an overview of what we are talking about today. So we'll do a little bit introduction. Some of you might be familiarized with us already. But for those of you who don't know us, want to share about who we are and our experiences, which kind of share the context of a lot of the content we'll be talking about today. Another thing I want to talk about is this concept of rule of thumb, meaning that outside of no worries, Katrina. Meaning that outside of the specific we want to talk about, here are some general things we think is important for you to keep in mind. And then we'll talk about research development, organization management, supervision, and personal development. Last but not least, we'll have a Ask Me Anything segment. So that part won't be recorded. So feel free to ask anything that you want. So Katrina, you want to jump to the next slide? Just a quick introduction about us. My name is Ariel. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a lab manager at UCI working memory and plasticity lab. Prior to my experiences in this lab, I have quite a bit of experiences just doing different project management and supervising students in different capacities. So that means that I really do enjoy talking about supervision and development, and I really do like the onboarding and the training experiences, and that's one of the reasons why I'm really, really excited for being a part of today's presentation. And then I'll popcorn to Katrina.
Hi everyone. So I do not have, sadly, as many pictures as Ariel because all of them are kept on a drive and I do not have access to them right now. So pretend like you see happy pictures from my post-bac experience, but I'm Katrina, and currently I'm a PhD student at Vanderbilt, and I was in a research lab throughout my undergraduate experience, and then also worked for a year in a post-bac lab before doing my PhD. So I'm going to be sharing some of my experiences from post-backing time, and really encourage people to do that before going into a PhD program because it's a great experience. So yeah, continuing on.
So here are just some general rule of thumb for us to keep in mind, because number one, like I said, I think these are just good tips to have. And number two, because everyone's experience is a little bit different, we can't really tackle every single one of them. So here's some generalizations that we want to make in the beginning. So the first thing we have to remember is that your personal experience will basically vary by your lab culture as well as your PI expectation and leadership style. And here I have 4 types of leader, and depends on which, pop culture you like. So we have Michael Scott and Leslie Knope, who are both very different supervisors. For some of you who don't know, Michael Scott is from a series called The Office, and his supervision style can be categorized with the word chaotic, if not just non-existent. However, he's a very personal person, and is only by the miracle of the script that he was able to have a great team. And the second person, Leslie Knope, who's very type A, very ambitious, very driven, and very organized. And then you have Professor Oak from the Pokemon series, as well as Gojo Santoro from the Jujutsu Kaisen anime series. Professor Oak is pretty much I don't want to say he is really organized, considering he doesn't have that much spotlight in the series, but you know that he's more of a supportive person who give you a lot of tips, give you a lot of suggestions, give you a lot of personal support in your journey. Gojo, on the other hand, is a very funny and almost sarcastic human being, and he's really, really strong, really, really smart, but the type of support he gives to his students is very different. So I'm using these 4 as a general example to showcase that today our presentation is only pretty generalized, and then your actual implementation about the tips will basically based on who are your supervisor and the lab culture that you have within your team. Another rule of thumb is your position description will give you or should give you an overview of your position. So earlier on, I mentioned that depends on the organization you're in. It can be really flat, it can be really hierarchical. Your supervisor can be really, hands-on supportive, or pretty much be, do your thing, I trust you. Similarly, your position is going to be either a generalist, where you're basically expected to do everything within the lab, or very specialized, so specialist. A good example is Using the title research coordinator based on the job description, you can tell that some of them are pretty general because you do RA training, you supervise, you recruit, you do outreach. Some other research coordinators are very specific. Perhaps you are recruited specifically to do MRI, so it's like an MRI technician role. Perhaps you are specifically help with one outreach project, so your whole role is within that one research project. So I said to say that your, actual implementation, the day-to-day will also vary by that. So when you apply or when you got hired, reread your job description to have an idea of if it's a specialist role or a generalist role. And then one other thing, and this is just something that I mentioned to my RA as well, is treat your lab experience as a professional experience. The reason why I want to highlight this is based on my personal observations, because I've only worked in higher education capacities. Oftentimes, because you're in school, you have this perception of it's a continuation of school. So there's a very blurred line between like professional versus like personal versus academic, because for me, as someone who worked in the same school I graduated from, it's like a year 4 for me. It's just like, this is my continuation of, my undergraduate experience. However, your lab experience is professional experience, and the professionalism we're talking about here isn't the capitalistic view, but is this emphasis on now you are a working professional, you are different from a student role, because even though you are still expected to learn, there's going to be a lot of independence and self-initiative learning expected of you. Another thing I want to kind of argue is basically, and this is just like true for myself too, basically any kind of like professional development books and resources also apply in research settings. So the first 90 days, it's a book to talk about here the first, in your first 90 days of your job, here are the, couple things you want to learn and do in your different stages. Essentialism is this book talks about how to say no to, needless tasks. Although it's a little bit hard, especially when you're entry level, but I think the principle is important, which we'll kind of talk about later today. The 4 agreements talk about different conflict resolution. Start with why it talks about, having a purpose. And the supervised practice is in my last role before I transitioned to academia, or talk about how to incorporate the competency that we talk about in school in the actual practice we do. I'm not saying to buy any of these books, but I'm just saying that in my experiences, these professional and non-research oriented books also help my role as an RA and project or as a lab manager, as well as RA supervision and project management. So that being said, treat your lab experience as professional experiences, and note that all of these other tips and resources are also or should be at your dispenses. Next slide, please. All right, and last but not least, I want to advocate for us to have the confidence that you are not less than others in academia. Reason being that, and I don't know if it happened to you, sometimes we're in a room as a lab manager who probably just graduated from undergrad, or if you're like me who got transitioned in this new field, you're sitting next to a PI with this many years of experience, you're talking to another PI with this many years of experience, and then your coworkers are your graduate students who are working on their PhD, which is something you're aspiring to do. So sometimes in these settings, it is possible and oftentimes common, if you are a member of marginalized entities, to feel like an imposter. So right here, I have a picture of one of my favorite films. It's called Hidden Figure. It's about 3 Black women who worked in NASA and who were instrumental in helping the launch of many amount of space projects here in NASA in the US. And I remember the scene of the lady just like marching towards the scientific or the male dominated section of and the white dominated section of the building, and they were walking with so much conviction and so much confidence, and that's a scene that's like drilled in my head. So I say this to say that if you feel imposter in these kind of settings, please remember that you are hired to do one job. People see you, people will believe in you, and you have the capacity to do so. So don't feel like, oh, I'm less than all these other people who have all these other degrees and titles over me. Because of the lab manager, you are really, really instrumental to the success of the lab. And next, so that was the rule of thumb stuff. Next, we're going to talk about research development. So the first thing I want to highlight is that as a hired professionals as a lab manager or research coordinator or research assistant or the 5 million titles you have, understand your role is to help, which is different from to learn with PI's research. That's why that when you are a undergraduate RA, people will give you a more grace period because you're a student, you're here to learn. But when you're a professional, not to say that people are not understanding, but you're being treated as a professional, so your expectation is to help. Like I said in here, this is an important distinction between that we need to identify, because although mentorship will blossom, working professionally as a researcher also means that you will then be expected to bring additional expertise and insight. So this means that you will have to do some additional learning and training on your own, because your PI might not, like, they might give you a general idea what to do. They might connect you with the right person to train you, but there'll be a lot of training that needs to happen on your own level, as PI won't be able to teach you everything hands-on or step by step. There we go. And they understand your lab's bread and butter. And this is something I tell my RA as well. So the concept is know what is the core of your lab's research. This is a lot of self-learning you have to do. Read your PI's paper, understand the project that's going on, because for two reasons. Number one, when you are interviewing for other jobs or when you're interviewing for grad school, they'll probably ask, like, what did you do in your last lab or current lab, and you would want to be able to articulate these points for your own good. And the second part is it helps with your job, because if you don't know what's going on in the lab, then it's going to be very hard for your RA to understand what's going on in the lab, because as supervisor, they'll be looking up to you as a role model. Next is spend time to know your PIs, grad students, RA, and other colleagues. There are two types of colleagues I kind of categorize them into. The first one is people from other labs. Number one is people within your lab, which is kind of helpful for you to learn. So what I like to do in my first couple months in the lab is to just, ask them if they want to grab coffee and just learn about their experiences. And then for me, there's two reasons why I do it. Number one, I'm an extrovert. I want to get to know people, especially those who I will be spending a lot of time with. And number two is, I feel like after that initial ice-breaking conversation, it's much easier for me to go approach them, asking for help, asking for resources, asking for tips, and vice versa. So it really enhances the communication aspect of your work relationship, in my perspective. Now, outside your lab, there are two types of coworker. You have people from other lab, which for me is mostly for networking. So for example, I've become closer to a lot of the grad students as well as lab managers of people outside of my lab. And it's just nice to have someone, second is other admins. So other admins are people who are working in the same department, but they work on the administrative side or the student affairs side. So people like advisors. So if you're in department of psychology, maybe you'll have an advisor. People who does billing, so a financial administrator, or whoever does your PI's budget, and just like people who are not within the research capacity in your lab, but you work really closely because you share the same building and you share the same department. Reason being that this really enhances teamwork aspect. So for example, here in our lab, we're under School of Education, and then we rely on our admin team to help us reserve room, to help us deal with billing, to help us distribute gift cards to participants. And all this requires some sort of teamwork and communication. So for me, getting to know them on a personal level, professional level really helps me, because I feel comfortable be like, hey, so-and-so, can you help me with this one thing real quick? And they're also generally really helpful and supportive anyways. So that's kind of like what I like to do. Next. Spend time to learn the basics, and this difference from the know your labs PI's bread and butter, because the bread and butter is more so about the research, so theoretic framework, that kind of thing. The basics is more about the tools and like the day-to-day, and you might need to do something learning on your own. So here's a list of things I've learned I have to learn throughout the year. So there's IRB, Excel, and Google Sheets. Now, if you work in a capacity that use Google Suite, I had to switch to OneDrive. There's also a learning curve involved within that. Slack team Discord, depends on which platform you use to communicate, RedCap, this Discord I already mentioned earlier, Qualtrics, Canvas, or Blackboards, etc., 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 etc. So all these are things that you have to kind of learn and pick up on your own. And it's helpful for you to like learn these things ahead of time, so you won't have a confusion of like, oh, I'm confused about why is there multiple, channels on Slack, or how do I get email notification through Slack, things of that sort. Going back to earlier, so if you are a generalist, you might be expected to do lots of other duties as assigned. This means that you'll be dealing with a lot of things that are not explicitly stated within your job description. This is a good expectation to have earlier on in your career, because I feel like oftentimes as young professionals, we oftentimes get caught off guard if we're like, oh, I didn't know I was supposed to do this. And then that's kind of when you have the slight confusion slash almost frustration, where you're like, I don't know if this is my job, but I feel like I didn't ask a lot. So I say this to say that understand that it's to be expected that you'll be doing other duties as assigned. And here are the examples, right? You'll be dealing with recruitment, community outreach. You might be assisting with graduate students with whatever project they're working on, because that's part of your PI's grant. You might be writing protocols for a lot of different things. You might be creating and testing experiments. You might be managing social media, which surprisingly is really common, because oftentimes we rely on social media to maintain the brand of our lab or do community outreach. Also supervise undergraduate RAs, etc. But know that most of these responsibilities, even though they are not explicitly stated on your job description, are within the scope of your position description. So for example, if your position description, position description says, oh, you'll be assisting with recruitment running participants. Well, technically the social media management and the community outreach are all part of, the recruitment aspect of participants. If your job is getting to a point where it shifted away significantly from what you expected and what you were first being communicated to do, I think that's an important conversation to have with your supervisor. Be like, hey, so-and-so, I really enjoy doing X, Y, and Z, but I realize this is taking too much time. And, I thought I was helping with this other project. So I just want to clarify my role, just so that, you're not being the person who's expected to do everything. Because, next slide, please. Well, I thought that the first thing was going to be, you can't be everything to everyone, which is important to note, which we'll talk about later. But speaking of research development, one of the things I think is just a good habit to have is just document team and development notes. Note that the team notes and development notes are two different notes. The team note is oftentimes about what happened in team meeting, if you're supervising RA, which RA is doing what kind of conversation you've had with your RA, so like what has happened and what has been communicated. Development notes are study development notes. So, where are the stages we are in, what are the things that need to be done, what are the timelines, who's our collaborator, things of that sort. I'm a firm believer that everybody should take notes. As someone who works in working memory lab, I know how unreliable my own memory is. So I always write down things, because I will need to refer back to this for detail. And that's why there's team notes and there's development notes. Development notes pretty self-explanatory, but team notes, say if you had a constructive criticism conversation with your RAs about performances, about letter of recommendations, and about just things need to be improved, it's important for you to document this, because you can refer back, hey, so-and-so, I know that it's been a month since we had this conversation and your performance is really troubling because X, Y, and Z, and I just want to refer back to the previous conversation we had, because I'm not confident in my ability to write your letter of recommendation because, these things we talked about before. This is something I've learned in the student affairs capacity, because I used to run a lot of conduct meeting to have these developmental conversations. And for me, that's really helpful in making my life easier as a supervisor. Again, there'll be frustrations and unexpected changes. So for example, you might have RA changes where a bunch of your RA mentioning that, hey, schedule doesn't work out, they have to cut back hours, so now you're short staffed. Know that you'll be doing school testing, but for some reason, some logistic things just not happening properly, so there's a delay. So please know that there'll be frustration and unexpected changes. It's just part of research, because research is always about figuring out and troubleshooting so that you can run the experiment. Another thing is ask for deadlines. So oftentimes, again, depends on our PI. Some PIs are really, really good at being organized, be like, here's my expectation. Some PIs are less clear. They will give you a general idea what they want to do, but it's not super detailed. So in your meetings, it'll be up to you to like ask for specifications. And for me, I always ask for deadlines because deadline help me to kind of prioritize and categorize what I have to do. So I recommend everybody to ask deadlines when they're getting assigned projects. Invest time in protocol training. Is very important for data collection. And I just want to give, we'll have a supervision section. I just want to give you all some context. So previously I came from residential education where we do like a 3 weeks training over summer. Like when I say 3 weeks, it's like 8 hours every single day. Don't worry, students are being paid, we're being paid. And the reason being that resident advisor, we expect them to do a lot of advising. We expect to them to be like the mentor for students, and we really believe in onboarding and training because the more trained and prepared they are, the easier it's for us to guide them because they already have the basic tools. We're just giving them the social emotional learning conversation about here's how you navigate this conversation, here is how you should be handling this situation. So going back to the protocol training, as a lab manager or RA or research coordinator, I'm just going to use lab manager because it's easier for the rest of this conversation. As a lab manager, you'll be expected to train RAs so the RAs can help you run experiments. If your lab have a really clear protocol, good for you. But if your lab does not have a really clear protocols on how to run experiments, I recommend you all to invest time and create a really, really, really clear protocol, as well as a really, really extensive protocol training. And I mean that going through the step-by-step in the manual, have RA paired up to do mock training, have RA to do shadowing, so that the more trained RAs are, the easier it's going to be for your job in terms of supervision and data collection. Lastly, on the slide, know that while your PI might be supportive of your own development, you should make sure their research or your job has been completed. And the reason why I bring this up is most people, based on my narrow perspective, I think most PI are understanding that people who are in RA or research coordinator or lab manager positions are people who aspire to do research in the long run, so they have this interest of doing their own research and applying PhD. They really get it. And I think generally they're really supportive as long as you're getting your job done. So say if you're like spending a lot of time in preparing your application and like your own day-to-day job is like slacking, I think that's when your PI will be like, all right, like, Ariel, let's talk about what is okay and what is not okay. And I just think this is important to kind of add in here because sometimes I have conversation with both students as well as colleagues where they have this frustration of like, this is something I really want to do, but I don't have time in my job to do it. And my feedback is, I think you need to talk to your supervisor about the expectation of what's expected for you to do, like your 9 to 5, so to speak, and to what extent are they okay with you spending more time to develop your own research? Just because, like I said, if you switch perspective, imagine if you're the PI with a grant and you really want to get this task done, and one of your RA, while our a stellar RA are not really doing the expected work, then I'm sure you'll get frustrated as well. All right, next slide. All right, so this is what I mean by like, remember, you can't be everything to everyone. This is an important thing for me to remember because as an extrovert, I like to talk to people. I like to get to know people. Someone who just get a lot of energy from doing things and helping people. At one point, I was really burned out because I was trying to be everything to everyone, for my RAs, for my PIs, for my grad students, for everyone around me, including the people in my personal life. But eventually I got burned out. So there's a good reminder for myself and everyone that you can't be everything to everyone. So came up with a prioritization in your own head, like which are the projects you're prioritizing? Who are the people you're prioritizing in terms of relationship building? So the 2 ways I do this is, number 1, always ask for clarification on what is is expected of you in terms of RA supervision and graduate student assistance. Because in my experience, I do feel like RA supervision, especially want to be a supervisor, takes up a lot of time because you're the developmental aspect, but it can also be really fruitful. It's just like a balance you have to kind of manage. The second aspect is graduate student assistance. And what I mean is you assisting other grad students with their projects. Because oftentimes when you are being brought on board, your job is probably funded by a grant. So you'll be working mostly for that particular grant. But as you become more, integrated in the team, you might be asked to help a certain grad student with something. Once or twice, sure, no problem. But if this becomes a lot of like additional tasks in addition to your grant study that you're supposed to help, I would ask for clarifications with your PI. Be like, hey, so and so, I really enjoy working with this, but time, deadline, jobs, tasks. I just want to know like what is expected of me in terms of helping this person with their project development. So the PI will be like, oh, okay, well, you're only helping out with the RA recruitment, or oh, you're actually going to be, invited in these meetings, but you don't have to come to these other meetings, so on and so forth. And then the next part is you will need to prioritize your times so others don't prioritize you for you. This is a concept from the Essentialism book that I mentioned about just doing the things that are really essential and important to your role. So in my own mind, the way that I prioritize my task is number one is based on timeline. If it's due this week, I'll do this first. If it's due a month later, I'll figure out another time to do it. But the second part that is really important for me was think about who is this direction or task coming from. So the way that I do is I always prioritize whatever the PI is asking of me just because. And the second is I prioritize a lot of the tasks or just like affairs revolving participants, because one of my biggest role is to recruitment and run participants. So there's a customer service aspect on that as well. And then I'll prioritize my RAs, because my RAs are the people who are actually helping me run research. And believe it or not, my own interest and research actually come last, just because, like I said, my personal understanding is I'm hired to do this one job, so let me do this job really, really well so that I have more trust and support to do what I want to do later on. Stay organized in data collection and protocol writing. We'll have a whole segment about organization in a bit, so I won't go too deep in that. And don't reinvent the wheel. So what this means is 2 layers. Number one is if there's something in the lab already, so say if you're in a very organized, very well-oiled lab, good for you. So you don't have to do a lot of this additional work. So if something's not, this is something that my old supervisor used to tell me, because I was just finding myself getting burned out a lot with trying to recreate new things or recreate the things that already exist. And then she would always say don't try to fix something that's not broken. So even if you're in this lab and the way that the protocol, the manual is not written based on how you like it, but as long as it's detailed and it works, it does not, create frustrations and confusion for the RAs, that's totally fine. You can continue building on it and clarifying more. The same goes to ways people recruit people, how we organize meetings, so on and so forth. But if needed, say something is not working, feel free to take the leadership in creating templates. So the templates part is the second part of the reinvent the wheel. There are so many templates online. Feel free to just Google blah 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 template, blah 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 templates, and you can always utilize those templates and make it your own to improve the your job and your team efficiency overall. So that's it for the research development aspect, I'm pretty sure. So next, I'm gonna give the mic to Katrina about organization, and here I have one of my favorite character, Leslie No, who's known for her organization and color coding skills.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. So moving on to organization and management. So the number one thing that I think will really help in a lab setting and also just in a PhD setting, just in general life, is learning some basic principles of organization and management. And in particular, in this role, you will need to know how to manage projects. So a few of these ways, or a few of the things that you can start looking into, are definitely developing a timeline, whether this is with the PI that you're working with the other lab managers that you're with undergrads, but just having a time in which you want to start, in which you want to have certain things done by, and then a time when you generally want to end the project and then start with the write-up process or whatever it may be. In this timeline, you also want to make sure that you have deliverables or things that you can actually say that you've completed and done, so that the meetings that you may have with your PI or with other people in your team are actually filled with things that you can show them and things that you can get feedback on. This will also include action items of things that you need to be doing, and as well as resources, like a list of resources that you can go and potentially seek help through. So maybe this is a department in the building, or someone in your team who's particularly good at coding something that you need for a specific deliverable. So just making sure that you have a list of people or resources handy for people to access when you're looking at the project management stage. And of course, this all comes with the logistics of how everything's going to get done, what rooms you're going to be needing to use, what equipment you're going to need to rent out, for example, just general things that you need to be thinking of. And of course, just thinking of the bigger picture helps understand your own role and how you fit into everything. So hopefully you have a lab that's already pretty organized and you are able to follow a clear guideline or a timeline of things that you need to be getting done, of people that you need to be talking to, of places that you need to be, and so on. Extra things that you can do are having calendars for your own sake, of just making sure that you know what the timeline looks like, what specific things you have to do on a certain date, and just something that you can visualize and see maybe on your desk or on your Google Calendar, for example, something that is there so that you can see every day what it is that you have to do, and it's broken up into specific tasks. Folders are always nice to have, so having especially folders for participants, for extra papers or study materials are accessible for you if you ever needed. That's always nice to have. And printing out things ahead of time is always something that I recommend for people, just to make sure that's always available and you don't have to worry on the day of meeting with the participants. And color codes. So that's always nice as well, just making sure that you see everything visually, and especially if you're a visual learner, it's nice to make sure that everything is organized in a way that makes sense to you. Also have notebooks available. So whether this is a notebook for specific different things in your lab, whether it's a specific notebook for a different project, whether it's a personal notebook for your own thoughts and tasks that you have to do, whatever works for you, do it. And you can experiment, of course, with different things that you can do, and whatever you enjoy, I think, will really stick throughout the process and will help you with your own project management when you get to a stage in which you are leading your own study. So a ton of tools are also available, so you don't have to pick the fanciest one. You can pick the one that works the best for you. There are a bunch of different websites that are available online. Trello is one of them. Notion is another one. Of course, these do require some learning, and they aren't always the simplest to use. But if you are wanting to find something that can encompass a lot of different things for your own sake, definitely go ahead and try them out. There's really no issue in doing so. If you find that to be too overwhelming, don't do it. Also, just make sure to consider the investment and return about learning curves. So don't be afraid to fail. I mean, this is a job where typically you're going to have a lot of times when you aren't doing the best, or you aren't doing something the way that someone else wants them, because people can be very particular depending on the type of person that you have, the type of team that you have. So they expect you to go on this learning curve and to understand and to take your own time in trying to figure out what's going on. Another thing is potentially convincing your PI and investing in professional accounts for the lab. So Ariel, do you have any examples of this, of you doing this in your lab?
Yeah. So going back to the tool thing, I just also want to add another note on notebooks. So what I also like to do is I have two sets of notebooks or like planners, so to speak. The one of them is about like lab, just like everything job related. I'll like this is what I take notes, blah blah blah. I'm sorry, I'm old school. Sometimes it's to take notes by hand. The second part is just my own research and my own interest. So say if I'm supervising an RA who's doing a undergraduate study that's really closely to what I'm interested in, so I'll use the other notebook to jot down and document our conversation. I am interested in applying for grad school. So for anything like grad school related, if I'm having a networking conversation with someone else in our school, I will utilize the other personal notebook as well. It just helped me to mentally separate my professional / my own like personal life, I feel like. Go back to the tools. So what I mean is like Slack, for example, has a paid version. In case you didn't know, the free version only keeps your conversation up to 10,000 like messages. So if you are using Slack for your group and that's where you communicate a lot, know that if you are at your 10,001 message, the other message will get deleted, which is not really helpful because sometimes you communicate important things in that count. So what I recommend is maybe have a conversation with your PI, be like, hey, so and so, we use Slack a lot, so we either have to make the expectation of communicate through email about important stuff, or we have to invest in the professional account for the Slack so we can keep these messages for a longer time. Another good example is like Trello or Asana, which is another like project management tool. The free version is pretty much, in my opinion, like enough for to do your own thing, but anything involves like you want to create more accounts for your RAs, you want to be able to integrate some like fancy stuff in whatever version of app you are using, there will always be a paid portion. And if you're able to convince your PI to invest in a paid portion, not only just for you but for the lab, so everybody are able to utilize this one tool, I think that'd be great. But if the PI is like, I don't know about that, we can also just use the free version of Trello like me and just make it work.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to make it work. And yeah, it really does depend on the lab culture and the PI and what they're willing to invest in, but it doesn't hurt to ask. So definitely ask, especially if you find something that works especially well for you, and that you think could be productive for the lab. So ask, sell it to your professor and see if it works out. So thank you, Ariel, for those great examples. Okay, so some great organization and management tools as well. Folder management is going to be a major thing. You're going to be probably overwhelmed with a bunch of different folders for every single thing you can possibly think of. And so Ariel and I came up with a bit of ideas for how we manage our own folders, and how this may look during the lab management period of time. If people are curious about how I manage my folders during the PhD, I can also talk about that at the very end of the session too. Ariel, do you want to go over your folder management?
Sure. So basically I have 3 types of folders. The first one is study folders. I keep all my study materials within the respective study folders. It's easier for me, it's easier for my RAs because that's what the environment they're used for. Now within the study folders, they are usually organized by like time frame. So like fall 2021, winter 2020. Sometimes there will be like an ongoing project that's been going on for like an entire school year. Then I won't include that. Another thing is sometimes if you're doing like a large grant study, there might be like different stages within the study, right? You have like study number 1, where you're doing this one thing, and you're doing study number 2. So I would then also categorize and basically archive all of the old closed study in the archive folder and just have a current folder. Now within the current study folder, I have a folder for materials. So these are the things that we need to print, or like just materials related to the study. Protocol, which is like the most important thing, like I said. Admin, or these are administrative stuff. So like maybe is the meeting notes that we have about this meeting. Meeting notes that we have about this lab meeting about the study, or maybe there's a list of schools that I have to contact or do like outreach, etc. Scheduling, the only reason why I have a scheduling folder is because I use a lot of like mail merge script that requires me to have a set of documents like pre-created, so I have a scheduling folder there. Literature review and RIB related things are in a separate folder. Now the T folders are basically like the folder I created to be shared with the RAs, so that RAs has like a little resource hub as well. So in here I have a supervision stuff, so things like their the template for their weekly one-on-one, for example, or the another example, or some of the professional development resources I want to share with them. They're also in the supervision folder. There's the RA to-do list, which is literally a list of the things that I can have to do. RA expectations, RA manual, RA schedule. So everything RA related is in the team folder. Lastly, the management stuff is only for my personal stuff. So there's more personal documents, the meeting agendas that I had outside of the study or the team meeting, and just other professional development notes and tools that I've accumulated for my own, personal gain.
Thank you for that. So very similar to how Ariel manages her folders, I had one for study materials fully, and depending on the study, this is going to have a bunch of different subfolders on potential like controls versus conditions and so on. So it really depends on your lab, and hopefully you can have someone who's there to help you model a way that works for you, or you can develop the own process that really works for how you want to process the information and organize the data. As long as it's organized and kept in a way that's secure and something that you can always look back to, that's the important thing. So I also had one for study materials where I kept all the protocols, IRB, data management, all the data as well. Also made sure to have the timeline of what was expected during certain times available to me, so I could look at that and reference it back occasionally whenever I needed to. That was always helpful to just make sure I was anchoring myself in how much I was getting done. Another one was for manuscript organization, so this was a bit different, but once you get, potentially during your lab experience, you will be able to work on the manuscript for a project that was finishing up, and this will be helpful to definitely have a folder for all the lit review, for the introduction, some of the resources that you'll need for those, a specific folder for the method, so everything that had to do with recruitment, potential flyers, so on, keeping it in the method section so it's easy to reference back to, having like a results section, discussion, and references. References, I think 100% people should invest in a citation manager. Zotero is free, so definitely start using a citation manager in your post-bac experience. This will significantly help you with your PhD later on, or with your own manuscript writing as you go on. It's just super helpful, and it lets you keep things organized in separate folders too that don't overwhelm your personal desktop with a bunch of different articles that can easily just be stored in a citation manager. Another one was having just like a MISC folder where I kept agendas, different professional development notes from meetings that I had with supervisors, mentors, or other team members, and just making sure to have a separate notes page for each person that I met with. Either this was organized by specific person or by date of when I met with them, so I didn't get confused between where my notes are for this specific meeting and so on. So those are some of how we organize our folders. Okay, so next, definitely use your lab email. So I think Sharon was the one who said in the chat that she convinced her lab to get a professional Google or whatever it was called, a updated Google mail platform, so that it was easier to work from home potentially. But definitely use your lab email for all lab related things. So don't use your personal email in that case, and make sure that you have a clear separation so that all of like your lab related projects, correspondences can be in the lab email, and then everything that's to you personally, whether this is for grad school applications or emails with previous mentors from different labs, can all be in a personal email section, so you don't get confused between the two, and it's easier to organize your mail through that. Definitely utilize your email functions. So I am a huge fan of the delayed reply response, because sometimes you are working at a late hour and you do not want to send an email at like midnight, because you don't want someone to feel pressured either to answer you or to think that you're crazy and are working at that time, even though a lot of people do that. So 100% delay your emails to be sent the next day at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., whatever time you would like. But this also helps you keep a nice work-life balance, so that you don't pressure people to answer you at a certain time, and so that you can organize when you want to send something sent, and so on. This is also really helpful for if you want to delay replies to people, to participants, for example, and you need to send it by a certain date as a reminder for them to complete a certain, a certain assessment, and you need them to fill it out by a Friday, for example, but you're thinking of this on Monday, you can send it to be sent on Friday. So that's really helpful. Definitely use templates as well. So especially if you're sending out flyers, sending out things on a listserv that is asking participants to participate in the study, you definitely want to use templates and categorize this and document it in a folder somewhere, so that future lab managers and future coordinators can use those templates, and they don't have to completely reinvent the wheel. So this is just a nice thing to pass on to someone who may be replacing you in the future, or to other people that you may have to train. So definitely use that. Folders, as we mentioned, folders are going to be your best friend, even using folders in your emails. So organizing things by projects, by specific people if you want. However, whatever works for you in your mind, use folders. It's really, really helpful. Reminders, I should use more reminders, but there's a very nice reminder section in Outlook, for example. If you have Outlook, you can set reminders for yourself, and it sends you like a little notification saying this is what you have to do. I think Gmail must have that too. I've never used it in Gmail. I don't know, Ariel, if you have. And mail merge, I'm also not sure about that. So Ariel, if you'd like to speak on that.
Yeah, so I think, well, it's three things. Number one, so Gmail has this thing where like if you send out an email and then it hasn't been replied for like more than 5 days or something, you automatically bounce it back. There's a paid version called Boomerang. It's like the boomer, like the toy Boomerang is also an extension you can use for Gmail, but like the free version is limited. There's a paid version, so it's up to you. But basically the Boomerang, what it does is like if you send out an email to someone, the person hasn't replied, it boomerangs it back. And then you can also like set up, reminders like this. So for example, if like Katrina said, if you're supervising RA, you want RA to turn this one thing in, you can pre-set up like an email to be sent out. So say if a task was given on Monday, it's due on Friday, and I noticed that, well, I feel like people might forget, so I will also write an email on Monday, but I delay send it on Thursday for my team, so that it will send out on Thursday as a reminder. My own personal self, what I do is I just integrate it in my calendar and the Google Calendar. There's also like Google Task if you want. I honestly just utilize Google Calendar for everything, so I just integrate to my Google Calendar. That's another way to do reminders. Mail merge is really helpful for recruitment, and if you're not familiar with it, feel free to look it up. Outlook does it, Gmail does it. I don't know other. I feel like these are the two most common email system. So mail merge is a concept of having a spreadsheet and having a template. They can merge the two together in creating individualized email, and you can mass send like 50 emails at one setting. So you're not like copy pasting everyone's first name and the email and then the subject title and send it out. So it's really helpful if one of your main job is to do recruitment. So I definitely recommend everybody to spend some time, just look up how to mail merge. Again, you can do it on Google or you can do it on Gmail, and you can also do it on Outlook. For Outlook, you have to do some integration with your Excel, which should be simple enough. And for Google, there's actually multiple ways. So Gmail has extension that allows your mail merge, but once again, it has this weird limit on the free account, so they can only send out 10 email as opposed to 50 email at one setting. Or alternatively, if you're creative and want to use this time to learn some coding, you can also write a whole script that allow you to integrate, once again, a Google Sheet and a Google document to kind of function as a mail merge. Basically, the sky is your limit, but as long as you understand the mail merge concept, I think it's really helpful tool if you are doing a lot of recruitment. If you're not, don't worry about it.
Thank you so much for that. I learned a new thing, mail merge. Definitely need to get on that. That sounds very helpful. So yes, very, very useful tip. Other general tips on time management definitely include integrating your school calendar with the lab. So making sure that your calendars can all be seen sort of on one calendar. I know Gmail has a great calendar function where you can have separate calendars and you can sort of tick whether you want to see it or not. So that helps you sort of reorient whether you want to look at your personal calendar versus like your school calendar versus lab calendar, and just having them all available on the sidelines so you can tick which one you want to see. And if you want to see them all at once, even better, because then you don't overschedule something or schedule something at a time when you're not available in a different part of your life. So definitely get intimate with your calendar, because that's going to be your best friend too. Another thing is to have an overview option of your projects with timelines. So having either like a big whiteboard with all of your different timelines and different tasks that you have to do. Trello is a really nice thing that allows you to do that online, virtually. So it really depends on whether you want to see it like in person and you want to have something that you can cross off and actually interact with, or have something that is online, which also allows you to cross it off. It really depends on what you want to do and what works for you. So definitely have something though, because that just helps you know that you've accomplished some things and aren't just doing nothing, because sometimes you can get in that mindset. You want to also make sure that you create internal deadlines, so deadlines for yourself as well, even though you may have these larger external deadlines that you have to make sure that you get something but to your PI at a certain time, or you need to make sure that you finish this what's it called, this certain task for a project at a certain time. You also want to make sure that you yourself are setting deadlines for what you need to be doing in a on a day-to-day basis, because that just helps you also feel more organized, and it actually allows you to break things up into smaller pieces that are less overwhelming, and then you can get through them. Definitely block off times also to do specific things. Like even now in grad school, I block off times for social events, because that just helped me know, like, okay, so 7 to 8, I am doing this or getting coffee with a friend or something. So I know that I am not available at that time and I should not be doing anything else. So if you can block off things in your personal life as well as your lab requirements or papers that you need to be doing, that also just really helps to make sure that you're getting it done and it actually somehow keeps you accountable. So if that works for you, definitely do that. Learn how to send out automatic reminders. So I'm guessing this is also a Gmail function, Ariel. Yeah. So you can, I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Yeah. And the same goes with Outlook as well. So you can just send out automatic reminders. This helps two perspectives. Number one is participants. So sometimes you schedule participants, and as we know, sometimes we sit there for like 15 minutes, only find out our participant forgot. So you want to send them a reminder that in that regards. And the second is when you supervise RAs, you're relying on them to finish X task by X time. You're sitting there for 15 minutes, this person forgot. So one thing that you can do is just set up a bunch of automatic reminders so that it reminds people that way.
Thank you for that. And then having some sort of RA grid or layout. So really just seeing, like, either doing this on a whiteboard too, or having this on a spreadsheet of having people's names and maybe a list of tasks or a list of things that they have to get trained on, and just taking them off as they are finished or as they've been done, because that just lets you know, okay, this RA can do this person knows how to do that, and it lets you really organize how to manage your team, especially if you're in charge or responsible of different RAs at an undergraduate level or even at the coordinator level. This is really helpful for you managing a team. So these are some examples. Ariel has some very unique examples here, very color coordinated, as you can see too. So it's divided by weeks, by the different projects. Ariel, you can speak more on this.
Yeah, for sure. So this is what I mean by like the whiteboard example. There's just a fancy term. I don't know how to pronounce it, like granite, some sort of grid or chart where you can literally see everything really fancy. Trello has it. And I think it's free. But anyway, so at least how I organize it. Number one, I work on a quarter system. So I have 10 weeks. So that's easier for me to lay it out. So right here, as you can see, I have my week by week. I have a different study that I have to do. And I have things that needs to get done by a certain week. I want to add one. Oh, thank you, Sharon. I want to add one more thing about like the integrate school calendar, because what I also do is I also integrate like the finals and midterms and like spring break calendars within my calendar, because it helps me when I schedule participants. So for example, I know that there's spring break coming up, or this is like week 10 or finals week, and I know for a fact I won't have a lot of RA support because they'll be busy. So then I will be like, okay, maybe this week I probably shouldn't run too much experiment, or I need to figure out who are available during finals week to help me run these experiments, so on and so forth. On the week, underneath the week side, you can see some really small but red words. So this was from spring. In spring, as some of us might know, there are a lot of conferences. So I write down all the conferences that either me or my RAs are presenting, so I have an idea of like, okay, so here are the events that are happening. So that helps me to visualize and think ahead of what needs to be done first. On the right hand is actually a screenshot of this game that I really like. It's called Fire Emblem. So Fire Emblem is a type of chess game. So what it means, you have like different characters and you give each different characters a role. And in the game, you are supposed to put together a team and have this team be in combat. So the concept of, well, the reason why I have this is because this kind of give me like the basic framework for my RA grid, where I'll know, so here are the RAs I have, here's what they're good at, here's what they're not so good at or need some more training and development, here's what I have been trained on, here's what I haven't been trained on. So it helps me as a supervisor to figure out who needs more support and who are the best person to put in a certain like position. So for example, as you can see on my left side, there's a lot of project and study that going on in the lab. So having like an RA grid of some sort, and like Katrina says, it can just be as simple as writing on a whiteboard. It can be more fancy where you're like creating, I don't know, a comprehensive evaluation of some sort. But either way, it helps me to know what I train on a certain RA and what kind of tasks a certain RA can do. It also helps me to keep like in mind of, okay, maybe this RA is a senior, they're graduating soon, so during these weeks they're not going to be available, whereas okay, these RAs have like a bunch of other extracurricular activities, so they're really busy, so I shouldn't schedule a lot of other things for them. It just helps from a management perspective to know who are your staff and how to like allocate them, so to speak.
Super helpful again. So yes, these were great ways of doing it. Oop. All right, Ariel.
So speaking of being a supervisor, I love the conversation about supervisor because number one, nobody teaches you how to be a supervisor, but number two, everybody is expected to be a supervisor at some point in your life. So this next segment is about supervision. So supervision is a big term, but it includes a lot of things. It includes everything from the beginning, so recruitment to interview, to training related things, onboarding training, to like the management perspective, so checking in, evaluation, and there's also like an offboarding or like the promotion and growth perspective, so promoting, staff or like serving as your references. They will probably ask for your recommendation as well, et cetera, et cetera. So overall, in my experience of supervising, it just involves a lot of documentations and templates, but it's for my own good because number one, I have to document what has been like communicated in terms of expectations, in terms of performances, and also just having templates so I can like use it. For most of these positions, depends on like your lab's contract or depends on your own goal. Oftentimes you'll be in this role for like 1 to 2 years, and not 2 to 3, or if not longer. So that being said, having some templates will help you to redo the hiring, redo the training sometime down the road. And then Google is your friend, so anything Google will have a template for you, or anything you need to know, so to speak. Katrina, next please. Thank you. So from the recruitment interview perspective, it's very important for you to have a clear job description and skill expectation. So I say this to say, if you're in a lab that doesn't have a job description for RA, I will create one. And there are lots of templates online, basically just listing out what is expected. So the difference between like the position description and the requirements is position description describe what the job is about, and the expectation or like the requirement sections list out what is expected of this person. So you can say things like you a certain GPA, you can say things like you have like basic computer skills, for example. And then both of these documents or listed out expectation answer the questions, what do I do and how do I do it? And this is really important for RA. So you think back to the memory lane. Remember when you were an RA, right? When you are on your school website searching research opportunities, you go to a lab, you're like, I want to be an RA, but I literally don't know how to be an RA. So having a clear job description and skill expectations help those people who are interested in your lab to understand where they're about to get themselves into, which then in turn help you to set those expectations later on for management. When in doubt, Google is your friend. Just Google things like RA, research assistant, job description, research assistant position description, things of that sort. And you can even look up like the current posting and kind of frame and list out your expectation that way. Considering making the recruitment process more structured. So what I mean is, depends on your lab. Some lab may already have a really like firm structures where there is an application process. Some lab are more like free, peace and love, where just email me your stuff. Because I'm a person who likes structure and organization, so I like to make the RA recruitment process more organized, structured, and that's just kind of like my background as well, to have like these big massive recruitment process. To give you all like a perspective, so when we do in my last job, when we do like campus-wide resident advisor recruitment, we oftentimes get like thousands and thousands of applications for like a team of 30 hire. So for us, the time is really important for us to have these kind of streamlined process, which kind of give me perspective on why I structure my current recruitment the way I do. Number one, have an application process, and it can be very simple. It can just be like name, year, major, and then I like to have like a short answer perspective. So like in the 2 to 3 sentences, describe like why do you want to be a part of lab, mostly so that I can get to know this RA or this candidate on a personal level, and also kind of see if they're like where their interest lies. So for example, at one point our lab does a lot of bilingualism study. But right now we don't do any bilingualism studies. So if a potential RA express a lot of interest, like I want to, get involved in bilingualism, then I'll probably give the feedback like, I'm sorry, but that's not the emphasis of our lab. I recommend you to go to this other lab. Another part of this application process also requires create recruitment templates, right? So have like an offer email template, rejection language with some development opportunities. So in my rejection email, I always include here a list of resources you can use to strengthen your resume or interview skills. And here are the other list of resources our school offers for you to find other research opportunities. And also interview templates, things of that sort. One thing, it's up to you. You can include it or not include it. So in my lab's current application process, we do ask for a resume and transcript, and this is for 2 reasons. Number one is I see this whole like RA experience as a professional development for the RAs. So as a part of the professional development experience, I think it's helpful for them to have a deliverable, which is like their resume. So the way that I kind of like frame this is like it's all a learning opportunity for them, and I provide resources, right? So a lot of my RAs are freshmen, or first year students, so they never had experience writing a resume. So in the application, I include a whole segment that if you need more help about how to write a resume, here are the links and here are the resources we offer on campus for you to like do that. From a student development perspective, this is actually how like student affairs division are structured themselves. So they are learning by doing. So here are the things that we don't talk about in school, like in classrooms, but are a helpful skill for RA to develop or for people to develop. So as a result, I do require a resume, but I'm not gonna ask for the perfect resume. I just want to see people giving an effort to create that because of the equity perspective. Another thing is the reason why people are able to elaborate themselves in 2 to 3 sentences is to kind of compensate for the resume perspective, because I know that for a lot of first generation college students and first generation like immigrants, international students, resume writing is a very cultural thing where they just don't have the resources. So allowing them to be able to elaborate themselves in 2 to 3 sentences in the earlier stage of the application process kind of also offset that, resume perspective. So I'm, keeping the equity perspective in mind as well. Transcript. So some lab requires a certain GPA that might be, set up by like the PI. The only reason why I'm requiring a transcript is not to pass judgment on students, but this is something I tell all of my RAs, like school is your priority because you're here for a reason. Let's go to school and finish your school. So if you are struggling in classes, I want you to focus on school first before you are expanding yourself, because I would hate for you to get really involved in the lab and just not graduate or have like another year, things of that sort. So the reason why I ask for transcript is just, I want to make sure that this person is a good academic standing, because if not, I think this person should spend more time trying to, get the classes sorted out, because again, you are paying money to go to school. The lab is not paying you to be in the lab. So as a result, as a manager, as a supervisor, it's very important for you to prioritize your schoolwork, because again, you're here for school. That's one of the reasons why I include transcript. This can be controversial because of a lot of the equity conversation. I'm open for a discussion towards the end, but personally, that's my philosophy, and that's why I do the things I do. And then note, everything that I just mentioned will base on your PI preferences. So some PIs already have a structure and wanted to keep it that way. Do that. Some PIs are like not super interested in having all these structures. That's fine as well. So please utilize your PI's preferences as like a frame of reference. Also references in that sentence. Think equitably. So this is another thing that I mentioned. Number one is if you provide a lot of helpful resources and structure your recruitment process as an opportunity for growth, I think it's really, really helpful for those who are, the first gen student who are already at a disadvantage. Also consider DI efforts. So if your lab has opportunity to have like dream fellows who are like students who are undocumented, who are dreamers, or if your lab are able to collaborate with a particular initiative on campus to like recruit students in a particular group, please do that, because I think those are really important efforts for us to extend our development opportunities, and also in a way to pipeline, right? Pipeline scholars, pipeline researchers, pipeline student leaders who oftentimes have been denied those opportunities before, whether or not historically or structurally or systematically. Also, make this a learning opportunity for you and others. So once again, learn more about how to recruit more equitably, learn more about how to structure your whole process to be more equitably, and learn how to provide these resources for your RA, I think are very important. Last but not least, have pre-written questions for interviews, but remain flexible. I think it's important for you to have some set of questions. I really like behavioral questions. So you are asking people to give examples of what they've done in the past, so you can learn their skill and learn their experiences better. Also remain flexible, because again, as we know, professionalism is a very like socially constructed and certain, group dominated perception. So be flexible, be friendly, be encouraging, and asking questions that allow the participant to feel more the candidates to feel more comfortable in sharing more of themselves. I think are also important. Okay, onboarding. So the difference between onboarding and training is onboarding is this concept about integration and orientation. It's more personal, it's more team-oriented. It's about this is who we are. Here's our culture. Here is our spaces. Here is the location, so to speak. Training is about how to do the specific on the job, so it's more technical. So in here I've listed out onboarding is more about team, so icebreaker, lab information, people, and space. Training is more technical, so how to run this specific session is very important. Both require some sort of organization documentation, like I mentioned earlier. So what I like to do is for onboarding, I like to make a presentation, right, and include cute pictures, have some icebreaker activity involved in. Training, I just follow the protocol. I just walk through the step-by-step on how to run this session with the with the RAs, so that I be trained on how to run sessions. Have templates for offer, rejection, orientation information, and onboarding training presentations. Pretty self-explanatory. So an example of this is sorry, that was like a reminder for me to share. So what I do is one of the things I oftentimes emphasize a lot in the onboarding session is expectations. So I have a whole list of expectations, which I'll also talk more later on. But I think this is important because, like I said, the more organized and structured and more clear you are as a supervisor, the more helpful you are actually for your staff. This can be a long process. So for example, my onboarding meeting can be 2 hours, which are kind of long, but again, I came from a background that has a whole 3 weeks of training. So that being said, don't make things long just for the sake of making things long. That I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that it could feel like a long process in the beginning, but I think it's really helpful and fruitful in the end. Because again, put yourself in the perspective of RA who have never done research before, who have never joined a lab before. The more structure and help and resources and training and information you can provide up front, the more tools they will have to understand, how to do their job. I'm a strong believer that a good supervisor is very important for development of a staff, and that's one of the reasons why. Always develop and update manual protocol. I think by the end of this meeting, you'll be like, Ariel loves protocol, which is true, because I really think it's important for us to document things, because what else you just forget. All right, so that was that slide. Okay, so this is what I mean by expectation. So I like to have a very clear expectation and communication up front. So you can do it 2 ways. You can either just say here are things you should do, here are things you shouldn't do. I like the second way, theme or quality based. So what I would do is I'll offer a quality. So one of the qualities balance and wellness is expectation, and I explain okay, the reason why I do this is because you're a student. It's important to not burn out. So it's important for me, and it's expected for me. It's expected for you, and it's important for me to know that you understand how to listen to your body, you understand how to take time off, so that please, when I tell you that you need to take a break, please do that. Please don't try to, over push yourself. Another thing is timeliness, right? So I use the word timeliness as an example, and I say timeliness is very important because other people rely on you, the participants rely on you. So here's why, it's important for us to be timely, and here's what's expected of you, etc. And also give deadlines. So for most of the tasks I give RAs, I always try to give a deadline so that they know to work on this. Because if you don't get deadlines, I think it's unfair for you to ask people to finish something without that deadline, because then the person's when I'm supposed to do this, now or later, next year. So that's why I think it's important to have deadlines. Be empathetic about the student identity and know that they are student first. So again, think back when you are a student, what kind of struggles that you have, what kind of challenges you have. So be empathetic about that, and kind of nourish those relationships early on, so they feel comfortable in approaching you if they need something from you. Also, just role model the behavior you want to do. Pretty self-explanatory. One of the things I tell my RAs, everything I expected of them, I can do it myself. So they know that it's not unreasonable, and they also know that it is for the team. And then learn how to train leaders and delegate tasks. That is very important because number one, at one point, especially if you have a large team, a lot of tasks, I think it's important for you to start having like student leaders so you can start delegating tasks so you are not just being like overwhelmed by the amount of things people are asking of you. So what I mean is sometimes I'll have special trainings so that they already feel developed. And also I give them special tasks for those already who have shown like great skills or, you know, great investment. And then eventually, if there are opportunities when you're allowed for paid RAs, I think there's also an opportunity to kind of like showcase your recognition of these RAs. So that's what I mean by train leaders and delegate tasks. Next, please. All right, I promise you we're towards the end. So now we're in the checking evaluation section. So provide timely feedback and learn how to give constructive criticism. This means that if RAs are not doing something well or are struggling with something, have those conversations early on and give constructive criticism, which means that you are giving them actual like tasks they can improve on. So for example, if RAs are always late, tell them that you are always late is only like part of the criticism. The constructive part is, well, how is you being late, you know, interfering with other people, the team's relying on you, the participant, you know, couldn't run the sessions because you didn't come here on time. And also give specific directions, right? So because you're always late, I think it's important for you to schedule to come in 5 minutes early so you're not always late. If traffic's a thing, then leave a little bit early. So this is what I mean by like supervision is about development. You are like teaching this RA how to be a professional, so to speak. And again, it could be long and frustrating, but I think it's fruitful and I really enjoy it as well. Have some sort of weekly report for RA to stay organized. This means that, and this is something I've learned from my previous internship. So basically what I was expected to do as a weekly intern, just like document what I did this week. It's not to monitor us, but it's for us to know what we did in the internship so we can use this material for our supervisor to write letter recommendations. So that being said, I think it's really helpful to have some sort of report system where RA can stay organized, so it can be weekly announcements, so RA know what to expect. I have a to-do list for them, so then they know what to expect. And also, this is the part about journal and log. So encourage RA to like log down or write down what they've done daily or weekly, so they know what they did. And this is going to be really handy when they come back and asking for a reference or a lot of recommendations. If you are a TA for some classes, or if you are if RAs are taking the lab for course credit, have a syllabus, have a grading rubric, have actual assignments. These can be really, really helpful for you in the long run because you won't be like confused towards the end when we're giving out grades. The RAs won't really be confused about the differences between like taking it for class versus just volunteering, things of that sort. Last but not least, okay, promotion references. You will likely be asked about letter recommendations. And then I think for school, you should talk to your PI because from a student perspective and from a school perspective, PI letter recommendation is usually the accepted one. But you can co-write and provide those feedback with your PI. Identify, encourage RA to exercise their leadership skills, like I mentioned earlier. Be supportive, developmental about their research projects, though this will take away time and energy from you. Because if you're mentoring someone, mentor takes work. But it may be, it also may be more, like the effort may be more than you think. That definitely happened to me, which I can share some personal example towards the end. But it's also really fruitful process. And if that's something you want to do, go for it. The general tip is don't be afraid to say no. So don't be afraid to say no to someone if you don't think they're ready. Don't be afraid to say no to someone if you don't have the time and effort. Treat others respectfully and model your own expectations. And lastly, be organized. For some reason, the more organized you are, the more people will look up on you because they'll be like, you're so organized. And that's like a big leadership trait that I don't think a lot of people have. Okay, so next. Go ahead, Katrina.
Hi again, everyone. All right, so Now, the final part of this presentation is really the personal development aspect. And as much as you want to be giving to the lab and helping them with their projects and their research, you also want to be getting something out of it, because it should be a two-way street, and it's not something that is just you give, and you should be able to take a bit as well. So first thing is definitely try to present at a some sort of grant-related research, whether this is in a conference setting, whether this is maybe in a smaller conference setting like at your university, a more regional one. Definitely try to take a piece of that project, which a lot of PIs and other members of your lab do encourage this from you, because they know that a lot of the times this is sort of like a position that people want to use to leverage to get into a grad position. So they want to make sure that you're also getting a lot of personal development and research experience in as well. So the next helpful thing is really learning how to manage up. So basically, the PI might not always have answers or suggestions. So you're going to have to really be resourceful and think about things from your own perspective as well. So that's number one. And that can really take some time and practice to get good at. And it's okay if you don't know where to look for as well. You can definitely ask the other members of your team. You can ask even undergrads who may have been there for longer in a university setting that you're not as familiar with. Definitely don't be afraid to look for help, but also find those resources. And actually finding other people is being resourceful too. Bring your own agenda during your one-on-one meetings. So if you do get the chance to have one-on-one personal meetings with your PI, definitely bring a set of notes of things that you also want to personally accomplish. So I was really lucky in my lab management position. My PI was very invested in what I wanted to get out of this experience as well, and how she could help me move forward with those goals. And so part of that was like coming up with the manuscript idea or presenting some research at a conference, and really going through steps of like, okay, so now I'm going to need to write up an abstract, and this is the timeline that I need to make sure I get this done by, so that I can send it to my PI, who can then review it. So definitely coming up with your own timeline of your own personal goals as well, and your own agenda. It's okay to also send reminders. So PIs can become very busy, and sometimes things slip their mind. So definitely utilize the Google Calendar, or if you're using Outlook, use the Outlook calendar function. Send out reminders, send out invitations to them, so that there's like a working time that you have with the PI, and it's built into the schedule. Also, as Ariel mentioned several times during the presentation, you definitely want to build trust with your PI and with your lab member group, because you want to make sure that they know that you're doing your job well, and that they can then trust you enough to go off and do your own personal projects as well. Because of course you're being hired to do the tasks that they assign to you, but you also want to be able to have your own slice of the pie and do your own thing. And in order to do so, you need to make sure that you're doing your first job correctly as well. So establish that trust, and once that happens, you will definitely be able to do a lot more independently too. And also know, this is a big one, that your supervisor might not always be your mentor. So sometimes the person that you are hired on to work with may not be available for you to consult with them or meet with them or talk to them, because they are very busy, or because that's not really the role that they envisioned to have with you. So sometimes there are postdocs in your lab, there are other older grad students in the lab, there are other lab coordinators in the lab that could help you and be that mentor for you. And it's really up to you to find that person or seek that person out, because a lot of the times the person who you envision to be your mentor doesn't end up being your mentor. So find a mentor in someone else is a number one really great tip that I learned really early on, that sometimes the mentor that you have is not the mentor that you want. And it's okay. And it's just now in your hands to find someone else, and cold email, ask other people. There are so many other people in the university too who probably would be happy to do so. I know that they're also very busy, but some people really do take mentorship and supervision seriously. And if they see someone who has maybe similar research interests as them, who wants to potentially go on to grad school, or who wants some sort of mentorship on like an abstract, I think people are typically helpful and want to help collaborate with you. So definitely look first within your lab setting, and then otherwise work outwards. Next, creating a personal goal list. So again, what do you want to accomplish while you're here? So of course you want to be doing a great job in your lab related tasks, because that's going to be helping you with a lot of professional development for grad school or for other different endeavors that you want to do in the future. And then you also want to make sure that you're doing things for yourself. So whether that's the manuscript, the presentation, just learning how to code, for example, things that you want to do for yourself, that you want to be able to say, okay, I managed to do this, and now I have this tangible thing that I can now take out into a different sort of field, a different sort of experience. Make sure that you have a goal list that you can reference back to occasionally. Be a good staff. So again, be on time, be organized, be reliable, respectful, and just be understanding of circumstances in general. So just in general, be everything that you would hope you would have someone. For example, if you're supervising someone, you would want them to be all these things. So definitely you want to make sure that you're doing all these things as well. And it can be as simple as arriving again 5 minutes early, just making sure that you have those folders organized, making sure that your mind is also focused on what you should be doing and that you know what to do. Next, again, having your own separate timeline. So for example, giving yourself maybe the first 3 to 6 months on learning how to do everything within a lab setting, finding the resources that you need, settling into a new schedule and a new norm, because of course every lab comes with its own sort of sets of norms and taboos and things that you should and shouldn't do, and that can take some time to adjust. So give yourself that room to process and to take in everything that's in that lab, and really brainstorm things that you can do at work to change or help you in your role. So if you're doing something right now in your lab setting that you think, oh, really isn't giving me a lot of skills or isn't really helping me with what I want to do in the future, you are allowed to ask for more things to do or for other things to do as well. And you can help shape the role in a way to fit your needs. Because a lot of times some PIs may have lab managers that they don't really know what they want. So they come up with a list of tasks or come up with a list of responsibilities that gives you a lot of maybe extra free time that you're not doing much in, or it's mainly menial tasks, but maybe you want something to do that's a bit more high level. So you can definitely ask, and especially as you gain that trust, you will be able to have more and more ability to ask for other responsibilities and other things that they will trust you in. And again, templates and manuals really, really help. So make sure that you're developing those as you go along. Make sure that you're reading the previous manuals or templates that were provided to you beforehand, and then tweaking them as you see fit throughout your time as lab manager. Okay, so that concludes the whole session. Thank you so much for staying with us during this time. And now we're going to go ahead and stop recording. So Sharon, if you